This episode is brought to you by State Farm. Knowing you could be saving money for the things you really want, like that dream house or ride, is a great feeling. That's why the State Farm Personal Price Plan can help you save when you choose to bundle home and auto. Bundling, just another way to save with the Personal Price Plan. Prices are based on rating plans that vary by state. Coverage options are selected by the customer. Availability, amount of discounts and savings, and eligibility vary by state.
Shh. Hear that? Big waves are calling. Dive into refreshment with Kona Big Wave. Tropical flavor and the taste of aloha in every drop. So crack one open and let the great taste roll in. Kona Big Wave, liquid aloha. Copyright 2025 Kona Brewing Co., St. Louis, Missouri. Mahalo for enjoying responsibly.
When you wanna grow your list size, pop up like it's hot, pop up like it's hot, pop up like it's hot. And when you gotta boost your revenue, pop up like it's hot, hey, pop up like it's hot, pop up like it's hot. Pick your favorite template, you can tailor to your brand. They're MailChimp-erific, you're gonna be a fan. MailChimp your marketing with our new customizable pop-ups.
Welcome to the New Books Network.
I'm Chris Holmes, and this is Burned by Books. Here you'll find interviews with writers you already love, like Jennifer Egan and Rebecca Mackay, mixed in with up-and-coming voices like Alexandra Kleeman and Rumaan Alam. You'll find us wherever you listen to podcasts, but check out previous episodes at burnedbybooks.com and on Instagram and Twitter at burnedbybooks. Let's start the show. The narrator of Kaliane Bradley's debut novel, The Ministry of Time, is a Brit. Not a literal one, but a figurative one in every sense of that word. She is tasked with living with and bridging a man from another time. Graham Gore has been plucked from the 19th century using time travel technology and having to acclimate him to the novel's contemporary moment in near-future Britain. That task is a daunting one when Graham not only has no understanding of the world wars that have shifted the politics and geographies of the globe, he knows nothing about the end of the British Empire, let alone the developments in computing technology and, for that matter, feminism. But as our narrator goes about the challenging task of bringing Graham into the present moment, she is increasingly aware that her endeavors are not neutral in the world of her present or in the past, and that the ministry's stated purpose in bringing back these nearly forgotten figures of history may be radically other than what it claims. Kaliane Bradley has written an extraordinary time travel novel that cracks open British history and reveals the way in which community, intimacy, and nationality are forged by excesses of wanton power. It is a narrative that defies expectations of genre, flirting with the speculative eye of science fiction while borrowing and adapting themes of spy novels and thrillers, and working in a pastiche of historical documents and narratives that gives a sense of the deep history at play in the evolution of our time-traveling characters. The Ministry of Time has already captivated readers and critics, and it feels as though it is taking the pulse of our contemporary moment by asking us to consider how history still lives with us. It is a remarkable piece of literature. Kaliane is a British-Cambodian writer and editor based in London. Her short fiction has appeared in Some Such Stories, The Willow Herb Review, Electric Literature, Catapult, and Extra Teeth, among others. She was the winner of the 2022 Harper's Bazaar Short Story Prize and the 2022 V.S. Pritchett Short Story Prize. Welcome to the show, Kaliane.
Thank you very much, Chris. It is always such a pleasure to hear someone else describe the book because, of course, I've looked at it so many times and thought about it so much that I feel slightly as if I can't see the wood for the trees. And I've just written down on the notebook next to me, excesses of wanton power. I loved that. I really loved that.
Well, thank you so much. I recently read that the Graham Gore of your 19th century Arctic explorer in the novel was indeed a real person whose daguerreotype you encountered and found quite spellbinding. Could you talk a little bit about that experience and how he came to be the core of the Ministry of Time?
Yes. So again, this is something that I've thought about so much that I often forget. It can seem a little bizarre that I essentially fixated on a dead man. During the 2021 UK lockdowns, I started watching a TV series called The Terror, which is about Sir John Franklin's lost expedition to the Arctic. In 1845, the British Admiralty, sent 2 ships and 129 men under Sir John Franklin to the Arctic, and they all vanished. None of the men came back. Neither of the ships were ever found until 2016, I believe. So for a very long time, it was a mystery what exactly had happened up there. And The Terror, which is based on a book also called The Terror, reimagines what might have happened in the Arctic to these men, their disastrous expedition that ended up killing them all.
Mm.
I found this completely fascinating. I mean, it has fascinated people for decades and decades. And I started looking up more things I could find about this expedition. And I ran across the Wikipedia page, actually, for Graham Gore, which is surprisingly full for someone who is very much a footnote in history, very much an important part of the expedition proper. He was the first lieutenant on one of the ships. And it was a sort of bizarre, immediate thing, the way that sometimes when you're struck by a thought or you hear a piece of music and you feel as if you've known that piece of music forever. It felt like that. I got onto this Wikipedia page.
Oh my gosh.
It's like our eyes meeting across a crowded room because his picture is there. I thought, that's a very good looking man with a slightly wry smile. And then I read his biography, which, described him as a very competent, very well-liked man. His colleagues and the captains he sailed under were all extremely fond of him, and sometimes it seemed slightly in awe of him. He was extremely good at his job.
I pulled him up, and he does indeed have a wry smile. He looks like he could be played by Hugh Jackman in the film.
I do see that. I absolutely do see that. It looks also, I like that photo because it looks as if he's looking at someone slightly off stage, like maybe someone's pulling a face at him. And
Yeah, it does look like that.
Portrait, which I really enjoyed. But he just seemed so fascinating to me and so reassuringly solid, both in the sense that he was very competent, but in the sense that I had a very strong feeling already for who he might be, and I didn't know anything about him. I knew a Wikipedia page's worth of information about him. I ended up doing a bit of a deep dive. Again, it was lockdown. I couldn't go out. I couldn't visit archives. I couldn't do anything. But I found a community of online polar enthusiasts, polar exploration enthusiasts. These are, not normal thing to be a polar exploration enthusiast. Yeah, it's a very typical hobby.
There's one of everything on the internet, so you were bound to find it.
Absolutely, absolutely. It was going to be that. It was going to be people who were really into boats. So they were very generous, and they shared a lot of their own original research so that I could find out a bit more about this man and the world that he lived in. And I ended up writing for them, actually, the very first version of the Ministry of Time, just as a kind of playful joke. I had no idea it would get to this stage, and it's quite funny to remember the things that I was focused on and thinking about and intrigued by in the writing process somehow managed to remain all the way through to the manuscript.
That's so fascinating, and I love the story of that evolution of your relationship, if we want to call it that, with Graham Gore. I want to talk about the sort of beginning conceit of the Ministry of Time, which is that the British government is harnessing time travel technology to pluck individuals from these key historical periods and bringing them back to the contemporary moment of the novel, which we understand to be sort of a near future, to see if they can be acclimated to an entirely new social and cultural world. What was appealing about this idea for how time travel might be used? And what were some of the fun things that you came up with that would be particularly shocking for someone from the 19th or even 18th century?
Oh my goodness, so much. So this started because I needed to have a reason for Graham Gore to be in the 21st century. So I invented this ministry almost as a crutch for what was originally just a series of vignettes between this, at the time, very much a cipher character and Graham Gore of the 21st century. But the more
fascinating.
Again, the way it developed was a real surprise to me. The more I thought about what logistically and logically it would require for a ministry to have time travel and to have brought this man into a 21st century, the more the ministry developed. I'm afraid during the UK lockdown, I was not particularly happy with the way the country was being run. I had a lot of, as we all did, I think, anger and anxiety and a terrible sense of helplessness about the way that the bureaucracy was running the response to the coronavirus pandemic. But I was also reading a lot about the British Empire. If you're interested in historical polar exploration in the UK, you are interested in an imperial project. There's no getting around it. And I read a lot of sailors' diaries, captains' diaries. I read a lot of contemporaneous material. And there was just no sliding away from the fact that this expedition that I was fascinated by, this man that I was fascinated by, they had a sense of the world and a sense of their place in it that not only did I not share, but it was it's an opinion that is against me as a woman, as a person of colour. And that again, I kept on thinking, what does the ministry want with these people? What would they be doing with them? What does it say about 21st century Britain that this is an experiment that they are trying to run? So I was thinking a lot about the legacy of the British Empire in 21st century Britain. I was thinking a lot about the ways we have not yet escaped many of those legacies, are sometimes unwilling to face up to the complexities of them. But I was also thinking about the things that have changed, because I think we are relieved to say things have changed since the Victorian era.
Yeah.
And the ways
some.
at least some, that some things have improved. I'd like to think. I'd like to reassure any Victorians listening.
Definitely ventilation in homes, I feel like, principally.
Some of the things that I thought about when I was thinking about what it would be like to actually have this Victorian man in a house walking around was, what do you make of a television, for example? What do you make of there being this box in the corner that people are hopelessly fixated on, and they do not look at each other, and they do not play parlour games, and they're not reading to each other, they're not making music together, they're just watching the box. So Graham Gore becomes immediately very aggressively hostile to it, refusing to understand either film or TV as works of art, because he feels as if it's replaced something. I also wrote part of the first version of the book during one of the worst heat waves the UK has ever gone through. I did think, what would it be like to be a Victorian who was living through a mini ice age, experiencing 40 degrees Celsius weather, which I think is over 100 degrees Fahrenheit.
Oh my gosh, yeah. That would be like such an incredible bodily experience, almost like another planet.
Yeah, it's just so bizarre. Going outside and seeing the housing stock, which mostly in the part of London that I imagine them in is now early 20th century, so it's housing stock they've never seen before, and then dealing with weather that they've never really experienced before within the UK. I think that the bodily shift, the physical shift it would have been terrifying. But I also like the idea of introducing them to Spotify, and this is something I go on about quite a lot in the book, because as I say, a lot of Victorian social gatherings would have included people making music. There was no recorded music, making music, learning music. Graham Gore himself was notably a very good flute player, and we have him saying in a letter that he'd come to a party with his flute and kind of made a band with two other men for the party. And I think
he was that guy in the present who just brings his guitar to every party.
He was that guy who's cracking out Wonderwall. He's constantly, he's serenading people. They don't want to be serenaded. He says, "This is a little something I wrote earlier. Everyone's groaning."
Amazing.
But I like the idea that if that's how you've experienced music, as something that is rare, as something that you have to go to or make an effort for, the idea that you can just get any music you want, pressing a button, I think would have blown their minds.
Oh, absolutely. And it's something that is Spotify is such a big part of the lives of my students now. So, 18 to 21-year-olds, Spotify is the dominant means by which they encounter music. And its AI is constantly teaching them what they should like and listen to and what they should discover. And that has good things and bad things about it. But it is such a contemporary young person's way of encountering music that I think it would be very analogous to, Gore's feeling about music as having to be produced and something that would be done when you get together.
Absolutely. And actually, as you say that, I grew up in when it was still possible to buy CDs, and that's what you really did for if you were buying singles. Most of my early records are CDs. And I was finding music because I was part of very small communities on LiveJournal. I don't know if everyone remembers what LiveJournal is.
I don't know.
It was a sort of online blogging community where you would be able to write about your lives, and you could embed music and you could share it with each other. And so all the music that I'm very attached to from my teenage years, I feel like I found through sweat and research and finding subgenres, and I think I'd have a completely different taste in music if I'd come to it via Spotify.
Well, and there's like the idea of the mix is sort of I mean, we have playlists now, but it used to be like a real, an effort, something that you had to put time and physical effort into making. And now, you just tell Spotify to make you a playlist, and it makes
It's not the same as burning a CD. We sweated for our arts.
Right. Or even like me with, tape to tape recorders and having to sort of put one tape in one side and one in the other. And that was a whole thing as well. But thank God that we don't have to do that anymore. So the narrator acts as this bridge, a guide to this, unfamiliar, alien, modernized world. And she lives with Graham. And one of the principal issues that he has in adjusting to this life is her presence as a single professional woman. How does Graham emphasize, you said the Victorian period, things have changed and gotten better. How does he emphasize what has changed radically about women's lives in this near future Britain, but also what hasn't changed much at all?
To begin with, it was a sort of a prickly issue to work out how I would write a man who would functionally become a kind of romantic lead. If I really believed that he was still convincingly Victorian, if he was still holding the values of a Victorian man, indeed in his own time he would have been a slightly pitiable figure. He was 37 years old, he was coming up to 40 years old, he was still unmarried. The Admiralty very much discouraged men from marrying before they made captain, just because of the way the pay and half pay worked. It was thought they couldn't support a family on half pay until they'd reached captain. So he is someone in the book who, in the background between the lines, is very anxious about the fact that he is still a bachelor, that he wasn't eligible in his own time because he hadn't yet made captain. And now in the 21st century, he doesn't know how to be eligible. He doesn't know how the rules have changed. He doesn't understand what women want from men, or what remains feminine, what remains masculine, whether those terms are even still relevant.
Mm-hmm.
What he thinks of as women's work, or what he thinks of as domestic labour, which would have once upon a time been covered by servants or by stewards, is now just done in the house by the people who live there. He's having to completely adjust to how he understands his own environment and his responsibility towards it. And I think that the thing I had to keep coming back to is the idea that he is an officer. The bridge is also functionally an officer. And that's how he tries to understand it. He understands them as two officers of their separate governments, which again, is the same government, there's a link, but as long as he can understand them as both as officers, then he has a clearer sense of what their relationship might be like, that she's a superior officer. This beginning of the book is a bit of a problem for her because she realizes that he's kind of defeminizing her. He's refusing to see what she likes to think of as her girlishness, her attractiveness. And then there's a whole scene where she buys a very silly chicken bag in a desperate attempt to get him to recognize her girlishness.
This episode is sponsored by Friskies, who would like to tell your cats hi. Now, if that didn't get your cat's attention, there is one thing that always does the trick. Just pour some Friskies crunchy food in the bowl and you'll hear those paws come running. Works every time. With so many Friskies choices, you can always bring your cats running from their secret napping spots. There's always more to explore. See for yourself at friskies.com or visit your local store.
I'm always looking for ways to show my cat how much I love her. And with Fancy Feast gems, I can pamper her whenever I want with a savory gravy on top of a gourmet mousse pâté. The pyramid shape makes serving simple, so all I have to do is peel and plate to make mealtime feel extra fancy. And with 2 entrees in every pack, it's easy to turn every day into the extraordinary. Fancy Feast gems.
A question that roils beneath the surface of the novel is, what does it mean to be remembered by history? The time travelers Graham and his friends were selected not necessarily for their fame, but rather for their closeness to death or ease of being removed without distorting the continuum of time. It suggests that they might not be remembered beyond their kin. And yet here they are in this most remarkable circumstance of history. Were you wanting to play with this contradiction of historical memory?
I really love the idea of what it means to be remembered in history. And it's something that I've recently made the good decision, the mistake. I'm still unsure about it. I recently finished reading Meditations by Marcus Aurelius.
Oh, wow.
As one does.
Well done.
And it was fascinating because that is very much a book where a man is constantly, I hadn't realized this about the context of them, the Meditations. They were written for himself. They were never intended for publication. And they are just him saying, they're like mirror affirmations, basically. Him saying to himself again and again, it doesn't matter if you die tomorrow. It doesn't matter if you're not remembered, as you just have to be a good person with the very small amount of time you're allotted. And the amount he talks about this, he wasn't actually calm, and he wasn't really fully convinced by it. He's constantly having to remind himself, you have to be simple, you have to be good, you have to be decent. It doesn't matter how you're remembered. Think of all these men who have already been forgotten. Think of the legacy of Socrates, which is enormous and important, but also doesn't fully realize the life of Socrates because he's dead. That idea of there being a historical narrative that you can keep telling after your death, that it's possible to keep telling after your death, was fascinating to me. I was fascinated by the idea of narratives in general, the way that we can take people and use, as you say, what we think of as their intrinsic historical attributes. In the cases of the expats, the fact that they're very near to death, that they are useful in that way, that they are people who have been pulled from points of disasters and that they are forever viewed through the lens of those disasters. It's a little bit like the way we think of the lives of refugees. We think of
That's true.
refugees and immigrants as being people who have been pulled from a certain context, and we view them through that lens, when in fact their lives are much more complex than just, I had to flee this country, I had to leave this land.
Mohsen Hamid says about why he didn't want to show the movement of refugees in Exit West, but to have portals was so that they wouldn't be reduced to only that one traumatic incident in their rich and complicated lives.
Yes, well, my God, yes, absolutely. That's exactly the. I've got to read that book now.
I suggest it. It's amazing.
Yes, this idea that like the journey is the only that moment, that being ripped across space, that being ripped across time, that is the way that the narrative will understand you, and that's the way that history will record you. It's something that the expats in the Bridges' own family have had to deal with, when in fact, within the space of the book and the way that the book handles their own personal time, their experiences of time, it's very different to that. And I hope it pushes back against that idea of the historical narrative.
Absolutely. I would call this a speculative worlds novel rather than a science fiction novel. It's not a hard boundary necessarily, but it does seem to describe the way in which literary fiction has borrowed from science fiction while wanting to steer clear of some of the hard science and heavy exposition that has tended to describe traditional genre sci-fi. Is this a distinction that you recognize? And perhaps who are the writers today that you admire for playing in this middle ground?
That's a really interesting question, actually, because I feel like I haven't read enough sci-fi to call myself a sci-fi writer, mostly because I know when you read genre fiction, especially any genre fiction, I include literary fiction as a form of genre here.
Absolutely.
There are certain beats that you expect or hope to be met, and a certain form that a narrative might take, or a storyline, the way a storyline might flow, that you've come to specifically for the pleasure of experiencing that. Because I would love to read much more sci-fi, actually, but because I don't read enough, I I think the book can't be sci-fi because I don't know if I'm hitting those beats properly. I don't know if the pleasure that I bring to a reader is the pleasure of that expectation. I hope that it offers a reader who's interested in sci-fi some of that, but I can't be sure. Actually, I'm going to cheat slightly and Paul, at the end of this, I was going to recommend some novels, and one of the novels I want to talk about right now is one I read very, very recently. I read it on holiday last week. The Dispossessed by Ursula Le Guin.
I haven't read that, but I've read other Le Guin.
It's so wonderful. It made me feel as if I had met a friend in, I don't know, in an unknown land. It was very, I felt as if we'd again, like, caught each other's eye across the crowded room. And this is partly because a couple of months beforehand, I'd read The Conquest of Fred by Peter Kropotkin, and reading The Dispossessed, which is partly about a functioning anarchist communist planet and the limits and possibilities of anarchist solidarity. I read it and I thought, God, I feel like I've come across this in Kropotkin. I feel like Ursula Le Guin has taken what Kropotkin has suggested as possible and visualized it in this world. And then I then looked up what she'd said about the book herself, and she said that she was very influenced by Kropotkin. So
oh my goodness! Oh wow!
very, very relieved that it was the case. But
you were feeling her through the space and time.
It's great. Sorry, I got so enthusiastic then that I threw my head back and my headphones split off. But
that's the hope here at Burned by Book.
I think of Le Guin as being a hard sci-fi writer. But, she, like, her worlds are clearly futuristic, scientifically fictionalized worlds. This particular world is called Arras. It's the moon of another planet, and it's quite barren. There is what is recognizably futuristic technology, including things like spaceships and supercomputers. But what she's using that world as a almost like a, what do I think? Like a testing ground for imagining what an anarchist commune might actually look like, realistically, psychologically, emotionally, physically. And maybe that's what, when you said speculative worlds, maybe that's exactly the kind of thing that I mean, and I wanted to do.
Absolutely. That's what because you have this functional technology of time travel, but you're really interested in, and maybe this will, bridge to my next question. I think you're interested in institutions of power and empire and neocolonialism, and it allows you to kind of test and play and, like, a sort of a grand experiment. But it's, this leads me to this question of the novel and empire, and the way in which the British Empire, which has, to Graham Gore's astonishment, set as, the sun and the horizon, but also seems to be in a project through this assimilation into the present of the past, a kind of neo-colonial recolonization of historical periods. And it reminds me so much of the way that British colonies were, forced to take on the infrastructure and education and economic models of England as part of the occupation and theft of land and resources. Can you talk a little bit about playing this out as a speculative strategy in the novel?
Absolutely. And in fact, I'm glad that you mentioned the way that British colonies were forced to take on this infrastructure, because one of the things that, again, was very much, it's a throwaway line in the book, but it's something that when I was thinking about the character, I couldn't stop pursuing that thought to a kind of narrative end. Arthur Reginald Smythe, who is the officer from the First World War in the book, mentions briefly that he was sent to look after building railways in India. And that's partly because I spent a lot of time reading and thinking about the British colonial project and the use of railways to centralize power and to make it very easy to move, for example, the military into far-flung places in different parts of colonized lands. Anyway, that's slightly beside the point, just another thing I was thinking about. Yes, the idea of colonization and the imprint of the good Britain, all of these people have been pulled from different points in Britain's past, which the 21st century ministry think of themselves as having progressed beyond, of having used as a kind of bedding to grow themselves out of. But nevertheless, there are points in all these parts of history that they are proud of. They are proud, like Britons are proud of British history. They want to pull these Britons into the 21st century to almost to prove to them, as part of the project, that at any point a Briton can be assimilated into Britain.
Huh.
What the expats are asked to do is to become good 21st century Britons. This is the kind of thing we ask of all our immigrants. Please come here. Please prove that you share our values, that you love our people, you love our country. But for them, there is a specific link between the Britain that was and the Britain that is and the Britain that will be in the ways that they are thought to, what's the word I'm looking for? Encapsulate certain eras of Britain and are treated as representative of certain eras of Britain. It's like making a kind of horrible soup, this kind of perfect version of a British subject, a British citizen. That was very interesting. It's very, again, this comes back to this idea of history as a narrative that you are able to tell yourself based on a very surface understanding of things like historical moments and historical personalities.
And it is almost like a sort of, well, it's a development of that historical narrative with literal chunks of history, in this case people, being sort of structured into this larger tableau. And it's meant to kind of, as you say, reflect positively on the evolving, but in a sense, never-ending thread of Britishness.
This idea that there is going to be a stamp of Britishness and it will be an improvement. Wherever it goes, whatever it does, and whoever it takes, it will be an improvement in some way. It is vital to consolidate it and to make sure that everyone coming into it exhibits its values, because it will always be an improvement.
Our narrator is Cambodian British, like yourself, which makes her a particularly complicated bridge for this particular neo-colonial project. Her Cambodian ethnicity announces her as othered to characters in the novel, and she herself finds that it gives her different insights into the cultural norms that she's meant to teach and enforce as a Brit. How does Cambodia and its own colonial history play into this idea of bridging modern British identity?
This was actually a very interesting part of the writing process, because the bridge originally was not Cambodian at all. She wasn't anything. As I say, she was just a cipher. She was a sort of reader proxy. And she was very passive in the original manuscript. She didn't really have any kind of personality, and the narration happened to her. And I thought at the time this was the most interesting thing I could do with that character. To have a very passive person whose ambition is basically given up to other people. My agent then pointed out to me that it would be very unlikely that someone had reached this level of seniority in the British government on such an important experiment by just being completely passive. And so I thought, okay, yes, it's actually not a very
fair point. It's fair point.
It's like, that's what agents are for, right? Pointing out that there's a huge hole in your book. And so I started to think more about what kind of woman would have risen to this level, why she would have wanted to be part of this project, which already from the very beginning, people are raising ethical questions about the way it's being set out and the core ambitions. And I felt like I started to understand her as a person who was afraid, who has something difficult in her past that feels intrinsic, that she cannot escape. And she wants to find a way to insinuate herself into power structures so that she's protected from this, this unnerving, vulnerable element of herself. I then, because I write quite a lot about characters who are mixed race, as I am mixed race, I was working at the time that I was writing what became the Ministry of Time on another novel, which was about Khmer Rouge, the Cambodian diaspora, the British Cambodian community. That novel went very, very badly and I was really suffering. But there were characters in it who I thought were interesting, who again had these complicated relationship with power structures. In the case of the person who became the bridge, it was originally academia, but I thought I could take her from that structure and bring her into a government bureaucracy. I did also debate with myself whether it would be easier to make her British Indian or British Burmese. So from a country that has colonial links with the UK. But then I did also think, I am British Cambodian. I have a very specific series of experiences that I can draw on, which I think will enrich the writing of this character. I believe I could write a British Cambodian well. This is my first novel. I want to be able to make sure I know what I'm doing and I write a character well. So I thought I want her to be British Cambodian. And then that made it easier to think about what was in her past that made her so keen to conform, to be complicit, to be running away from an intrinsic vulnerability. She thinks of the historical trauma, the inherited trauma of the Khmer Rouge, which her mother had to escape, as that kind of intrinsic vulnerability that she wants no part of. For a couple of chapters in the book, at the very beginning, she's reluctant to even admit to Graham that she is mixed race, because even that feels like admitting too much, given what she knows about his imperial attitudes.
Yeah. And that vulnerability would, put her in a position that she wouldn't be able to do her job.
Yes, absolutely. And for her, the idea that if you can do the job, you can get the power, you get to the point of power, you get to the place where you are in control, that's the only way you're safe within this very rigid bureaucratic structure. They've given you your orders. If you follow the orders, you're going to be okay, is what she keeps telling herself.
When kids don't play, they grow up without creativity. They'll try to blend in and wear chinos, or worse, polyester chinos. Good thing Gushers, Fruit by the Foot, and Fruit Roll-Ups are made to be played with. You better be playing.
The McDonald's Snack Wrap is back. You brought it back. Ranch Snack Wrap. Spicy Snack Wrap. You broke the internet for a snack. Snack Wrap is back. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
And now that it makes so much sense now that you've made that direct link for me, the sort of escape of the Khmer and all the sort of fear and vulnerability and under that regime, and how that would how the narrator would constantly want to have armor against that and to not have areas of weakness or Achilles heels that might set up the same kind of vulnerabilities. That makes so much sense.
I'm very glad it does.
One of the remarkable and really unique things about the Ministry of Time is its tonal play. It's at times nerve-wracking and deadly serious, feeling much like a spy drama or a thriller. But in that very same moment, there can also be dry, biting humor. There's sex and there's romance and even a tone that I might describe as a kind of prestige historical fiction vibe, even though, as you say, it's a text that wants to break down that very genre. How did you approach the tone of the novel, and what were the structures that helped you to craft it?
When I first started writing, and I think this maybe has remained in every version of the book, because I was just writing it for a very small group of friends, this community of polar exploration enthusiasts. What I mostly wanted to do was make them laugh and make sure they wanted to keep on reading.
So you really imagined them as the audience for this initially?
Absolutely. It was very much them. And I think if I'd thought of it as more than, I had 5 readers to begin with and I finished up with 15. I thought that, wow, tripled my audience, incredible, I'm a genius. I'm a huge success, 15 people. I think if I'd ever visualized it beyond 15 people, I don't think I'd have been able to write the book. I would have panicked. So I think humor was very important to me, partly because I wanted my friends to laugh and to have a good time and to want to keep reading, but also because the more that I developed the book, the more that I thought about, the more I realized that once again, I was just writing about the things that worried me, that always concern me, that always feel pertinent to me, which are sometimes, more complex and more difficult than just, wouldn't it be funny if a Victorian polar explorer lived in your house? I find humor for me, is a very useful tool to deliver or to examine or to approach topics that I sometimes find more difficult to talk about in a serious tone. And it's in some ways it is a failing on my part, but it is in prose. It's a
gift, I think.
Thank you. I was going to say crutch. I prefer gift. The book, then, it's partly, as you say, there's an element of romance, of rom-com, there's an element of science fiction, there's elements of spy thriller. And in all of those cases, I'd drawn on and was inspired by very particular works within each genre because I wanted the idea, sorry, that's completely nonsensical. I wanted to seduce the reader. I wanted to seduce the reader via genre. Mm-hmm. Again, it's this idea of the narrative taking you where it wants you to go and telling you what you should be expecting. And each time I wanted the genre to be pulled away because it is a romance. It's a romance between two people from different worlds who fall in love despite the odds, but even as you are attracted to this romance, you should feel, I hope, a little repulsed by some of the choices that the heroine, quote unquote, is making.
Absolutely.
Is it a romance if she is monitoring the person she's supposed to be having a romance with and withholding information from him? It is a spy thriller, it's a kind of government bureaucracy spy thriller that ends up being a lot of guns and motorcycle chases and drama, but at the same time, so much of the action is people sitting in rooms deciding one another's fates that's not the stuff of an action movie. That's just the stuff of contemporary life. All of these genres, I think, can be so much fun to play with and then pull out from under the feet.
Yeah, I love that. There's a South African writer, Ivan Vladislavich, and he says, whenever I feel my reader might be getting comfortable, I like to sort of, kick the bucket out from underneath them and destabilize them. And I feel like I felt like you were doing that. And it sounds like that might have been your hope, that you were able to, unsettle the reader a little bit with tone.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad it worked for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are moments that are, when, there are kind of assassinations and crazy things happening that feel very, spy oriented. And then there'll be like a hilarious and absurd moment that's sort of like abutting directly up against it. And then you've got these backward looking chapters into Graham's time in the Arctic that feel like historical documents. And I know you weren't able to do archival research, but you were engaging this incredible online community of polar enthusiasts. How much of those sort of historical moments are pulled from his actual archive?
That quite a lot of it is inspired by other Arctic expeditions that did come back. I'm afraid Graham does something in those historical sections, and I just want to make it clear now, there is no evidence that he did that thing.
Okay.
Yeah, I said that he did in my book. And I'm so sorry to the real historical Graham Gore for saying that about him. But that did happen. Sorry, again, I'm trying to avoid spoilers, but that did happen on an Arctic expedition, which Robert McClure, who's also mentioned in the book, was on. And the way they tried to deal with it is very similar. Equally, the way that I've tried to describe the deterioration of the expedition, numerous Arctic expeditions sent by the British to the Arctic deteriorated, mostly because these men turned up. They were unwilling to take advice from the Inuit. They were unwilling to let go of the trappings of this kind of officer class imperialism, which meant they were wearing the wrong clothing and eating the wrong food. And so, of course, they made idiots themselves, and often there was terrible loss of life. But I did draw a lot on contemporaneous documents to make it feel realistic. The other thing I really wanted to do with including those is when I first wrote the book, I think until draft 3 or 4, those sections didn't exist. I gave the book to a very good friend of mine who is an editor, actually. She works in the UK at Picador. And she said, "This is great, but I don't understand who this guy is, and I don't understand what this expedition is, because I'm not one of your nutty friends. So you're going to have to give me some more context." And then I realized that I had been depending on the reader bringing quite a lot of knowledge about Arctic exploration to the book, and I needed to fill that out.
Yeah, and it does it so well, and it's gripping, and it adds all these different layers of bravery and confidence and the failure of confidence, and the background of Graham's context for how he acts in the present, which does remarkable work. Before I let you go, you've already given us Ursula Le Guin's The Dispossessed.
Sorry.
No, I'm going to run out and get it. It sounds amazing. But I wonder if you have a couple more recommendations for us.
Absolutely. So I'm also very recently read, I also took this on holiday, Martyr by Kaveh Akbar, which I thought was miraculous. I don't know what I was expecting. I knew what the book was about, which is a young man, Iranian American, who simply has got to the point where he's no longer interested in living. He wants to die. He's a recovering addict. He feels like his days don't make sense. Living does not make sense. But if he wants to die, he wants to die for a good cause. And he meets in New York, in Brooklyn, an artist who is dying of cancer, who is in conversation with people at the end of her life. It's her last artwork, a kind of installation piece where people will just come and talk to her at the end of her life. And they have a conversation that both stretches into his future and also into their simultaneous pasts. So I knew that about it. And so I felt like I knew I was getting something weighty and difficult and that would force me to think about the meaning of life. Marcus Aurelius, again, is also very helpful about this. What I wasn't expecting was first of all, it's a beautiful book. He's Kaveh as a poet, and I think you can really tell that.
It's so lyrical.
It's so lyrical, but it's also it's so light-footed. I expected it to be so heavy. I expected to have to put it on like a backpack full of rocks and take it to its narrative end. But instead, I felt like I was being borne along. I felt like it was teasing me sometimes, that book. It was playing with me. It was just such a pleasure. It was so full of life. It was such a wonderful book. So
I hope he gets to hear that description of it, because that's one of my favorite descriptions of a book. That's wonderful. Borne along, and not like a backpack full of rocks.
Not like a backpack. It's the highest compliment you can pay. It's not like a backpack full of rocks.
I think so.
And another book that I wanted to recommend, which I actually don't think is published in the UK, so I'm very, I keep on recommending it everywhere, is Beautyland by Marie-Hélène Bettino.
I interviewed her and I adore that book.
She is wonderful, and that book is wonderful. I'm very frightened of flying, and I don't like flying. And until this book was published, I hadn't been to the US in 8 years because I didn't want to get on a plane. I took that book along, and I was finishing it as we were beginning our descent into New York, and I forgot I was on a plane because I was crying so much. Not because it is a sad ending, I think, but also it just felt so hopeful, and it felt so honest and so beautiful that I don't know. I felt very attached to it. I felt attached to it, and I felt like I'd lost a friend when it ended. So yeah, Beautyland by Marie-Hélène Bettino. She must have been wonderful to interview as well.
She was, and she would love that description of it as well. I feel lucky that I got to hear your descriptions of those books, two of which I already love, and I'm quite sure that I will love the Ursula Le Guin. But really, The Ministry of Time is one of the best books of the year. And
Thank you very much.
Will stay with me for a very long time, and I'm glad that it's getting the attention it's getting, because I think it's doing such wonderful things with the idea of history and time and how we make and build communities and how we cut across differences to do that very thing. But I can't recommend it enough to my listeners. And Kaliane, it was such a delight to talk to you. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you. This was a lot of fun, and I was very glad to revisit this book in this refreshed and exciting way.
Well, thank you so much. Well, that's all from me for now. My great thanks to Kaliane Bradley for coming on to talk about her blockbuster debut novel, The Ministry of Time. Assuredly one of the best books of the year. You can find links to purchase The Ministry of Time and all of Kaliane's recommended books at the website, burnedbybooks.com. There you'll find all of our previous episodes, links to buy a podcast t-shirt, and ways to get in contact. As you listen, take a moment to rate the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts. Until next time, this has been Burned by Books.